it always has been on my mind how to organize the transition in tempo between the preludes and the fugues of the well-tempered clavier as chosen by Bach. I'm not going to, well, sometimes I do, but in today's purpose is not to reorganize them by picking different preludes to marry with different fugues. It's more about the ones that he chose and how to find the best meaningful transitional tempo rapport. It's important to manage to play the ending of each prelude and then the beginning of the fugue. If it starts with an upbeat, as many do, how to make sure that it's understood. If it's a rapport of a simple to double in tempo, if let's say the prelude is strikingly driven and then the fugue is very meditational and calm, or singing. Or if the two are in the same spirit, and sometimes it is in the kinship, which is really exciting. Though the touch is different, and therefore you have to have a different presentation of the tonality, since the prelude is to establish it in the first place. Therefore, some kind of a sound colorization of the piece, because naturally, at the time, Bach purposely wrote it in each key in order to show that you can play in every key in this new well-tempered tuning, which in fact was sounding not in tune to them, because of Zilberman, his organ builder friend, who came up with this ingenious way to keep unisons by shrinking thirds, and therefore playing in every key on the same instrument, which wasn't the case before. And so you have pieces in C, D, E, G, but of course F sharp and D sharp and A sharp or B flat, and in lesser visited keys. And the fact that he wrote 2 books 20 years apart for each of the tonalities for his students or his children or both, as in any case, it was very interesting to observe that he probably decided that he'll do different for some, but somehow some of them in the given tonalities corresponding in book 1 and 2 between 1720 or 1740 when he wrote them, are really in the same mood, as if the tonality, the color of the tonality had a specific mood musically. That's my imagination, but everybody has a personal approach to these things about colors or atmospheric timbres, or perhaps tastes, how you translate the tonalities. It's very interesting, actually. And it's very personal. Of course, also the fact that with relative pitch you can accept anything, since you transpose rather than hear the very note. The G is not a G if it's not tuned to 440 according to what we're used today. If it's tuned to 415, it's inevitably a G flat or an F sharp. And 380 something will be F, etc. So besides the traditions and the styles of tuning, but the very pitch changes a lot the perception. So if you have a perfect pitch, as I used to do until the Baroque pitches tunings confuse me now, I realized that in fact it's a very healthy thing to think that a tonality can implement a mood, and that you find that commonly between book 1 and 2 for some of the tonalities. Though again, in Bach's time there was no unity of 440 tuning for A. It was in fact changing, especially for the organs, they say up to a third or if not more. So an organ prelude and fugue in A minor, as meaningful as A minor is, brooding or expressive of some kind of a, enchantment or some kind of a lament, it doesn't matter, because it could sound in F sharp or in F. So therefore you play in A but it sounds in F. It must be confusing for performing with the perfect pitch, because then you feel some kind of dyslexia, so to say, between some kind of a pitch dissonance between what you touch and what you hear on the keyboard and the sounds that come out. On the harpsichord, even a semitone is a lot. given the fact that we attach such an importance to the tonality as a choice for the mood and the atmosphere. And perhaps he did too, but perhaps it had to be relative since they lived in relative pitches and tunings mostly. But there again, there are preludes and fugues, and they have to be organized. They have to be introducing the fugue. The fugue is the main course of the prelude and fugues. The prelude is there to set the atmosphere. So what does it do? It indicates who's the dominant, but first who's the subdominant. In the circle of fifths, in each tonality is the fifth under the dominant. And then in the same disposition, the fifth above the tonic is the dominant, the fifth under the tonic is the subdominant. So he obviously establishes these important tonality notes, chords, and then travels. And some of the preludes are even equally polyphonic as the fugues, without to be a fugue in the form. But there are contrapuntal, oh my God, E major book 2, E flat major book 1, I mean so many. In fact, I think Bach never thought vertical. I think even when we have chords, there are succession of possible canons of roots, thirds, and fifths for the inversions. Yeah, I think Bach heard everything constantly polyphonic, layered. Yeah. We can try to rise to his hearing, but we might not climb very high. At least I remain on the feet. But nevertheless, it's so exciting to play. Besides, they're old friends, since now it's been 4 decades that I live with them. Well, not daily, but almost. C'est ça, fa, sol, mi, la, sol, la, do, si. La, fa, mi, re, do, si, fa, re, fa, la, fa, do, fa, si, fa, re, fa, la, fa, la, si. Fa, sol, fa, si, re, do. La, so, si, la, so, fa, do, mi, re. I know it's silly to solfege like that. It sounds childish. Actually, it is. My childhood, I spent solfeging them, copying them, writing them, in clefs even. Well, that's another story. But the point is that they live in me. But that doesn't mean that because they live in me in a sense of, like, memories of friends that you are happy to see again, which is what I do when I look at them again. Teach them, play them, record them, think of them. And somehow, sometimes they reveal themselves differently. Of course, depends on the instrument. But roughly spoken, the endings of the prelude and the beginning of the fugue are very important connections. Sometimes disconnections, sometimes direct connections, especially when you're in minor key principle and you finish with a he finishes with a Picardy third, and then the subject starts in minor. You wonder, why did he do that? Why didn't he finish only the fugue in Picardy third, since after the fugue there is no other piece, since the prelude is before the fugue? There's no postlude after the fugue. The prelude is before the fugue. But he does that, which means that probably he was expecting people to practice them separately from the fugues. But they are, for good or bad, for real or imaginary, they are connected, preludes and fugues. So we'll explore the codas of the preludes and the expositions of the fugues, and how they talk to each other in terms of pulse, in terms of raising, and in terms of contrasting or similar moods. All this is very personal, not doctoral, not statements, not ideologies about in which meter that corresponds, because we can think that the upper number matters less than the bottom if it's in 16, 8, or 4 or 2. For the half notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, quarter notes, of course. And but the units mean list, well, they could mean a lot. But they don't mean always the way we think. I mean, that's what I realize with experience. Because you would think then that the fugues that have 16ths, like for instance, fa mi fa do, la sol la re, do re mi fa mi re do re si la sol fa mi si la re sol re do, fa si fa mi re do sol si do, si la si do re mi bemol re do re mi fa sol la si bemol la sol la do la sol fa mi. F major of Book 2 is in 16th notes. But so is C sharp minor of Book 2. Do, si, do, re, sol, la, si, do, re, mi, fa, re, sol, fa, mi. Sol, fa, sol, la, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, la, re, do, si, la, si, sol, do, si, la, sol, la, fa, si, la, sol. Si, do, re, sol. It's the third entrance. It could be do, si, do, re, sol, la, si, do, re, mi, fa, re, sol, fa, mi. Like fa, mi, fa, do, la, sol, la, re, do, re, mi, fa, re, do, re, si, la. The F major. What about G sharp minor, Book 2? Sol, la, si, la, re, sol, si, la, sol, la, si, do, si, mi, sol, la, do, si, la, si. It's all in eighth notes. So the one is all in 16th notes in C sharp minor, the other one is all in eighth notes in G sharp minor. And the F major is in 16th notes, but with rest. Fa, mi, fa, do, la, sol, la, re, do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, re, si, la. But I think that we are influenced by the fact of them. I am, at least, not we. You know, who is the we? Me. Just I am probably wrong to think that if there are 16th notes as principal value of the rhythmic choice of notation, that it implements a faster tempo. And that if they are in half notes, whole notes, it's more choral vocal, like Book 2 E major. Mi, fa, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, si, mi, fa, sol, la, si, la, sol, fa, mi, re. Or Book 1, 5 voices, C sharp minor. Do, si, mi, re. But that has a reason, because he'll have then sol, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, fa, mi, a running eighth note second subject, and do, fa, mi, re, mi, a third subject. So you have eighth notes, quarter note subjects, which then people the whole and half notes of the subject in long values, just like the Santan E flat major organ triple fugue. Si, sol, do, si, mi, re, mi, that has sol, fa, sol, do, mi, re, mi, do, fa, mi, fa, si, re, do, re, si, mi, to be adjusted on top of it. So in other words, very often the fugues that have long values have second themes or thematic materials that are in faster movements, tempi indications through the values. Or is it just that after all, it's how it intimately talks to our soul and differently to each of us, which is so beautifully marvelous. It doesn't have to be one fits for all rights of tastes of how to play. No. Actually, I'm often hearing it differently than the way I imagine it when I do it. And I find that beautiful, meaningful, opening horizons. You can have very strong opinions and be very tolerant. That's what Mademoiselle taught me to do. Boulanger naturellement. Shall I even need to? But it's better to say it. In case there is a confusion. She said, be ruthless with yourself and tolerant with the others. Well, takes a saint for that, and I'm not. But I try. It's so easy to do the opposite. Ruthless with the others and always forgiving it oneself. I'm tired. The piano is not good today. Enfin, c'est la vie. Ah, playing Baroque music on the piano. What a real pleasure and challenge. And in a way, it's unprecedented in history of music because when people practiced, played, studied, or took lessons of this music was with composers of their time. Bach, if not himself, they studied music of their time in their area, of their time period, in their geographic area. Very few traveled cross-pollinating Europe with Italianate, French, possibly Dutch, that was called Flemish, and then of course Spanish or possibly British, well, English at the time, influences, because people didn't travel, or very little. And then the concepts of the facts that were discussed were then much less obviously organized because there was no unity for decision on ornaments, tempi, modes, tonalities, notation. And so you have to immerse yourself in the characteristics of each time period, and Bach himself borrows a lot by his imagination of what is Italianate, in the decoration of what is French, in the rhythmicity of what is this and that. And he writes a lot in the style of, but according to him, not so much as ethnomusicologist, of course he wasn't, and he couldn't be. But the point is that today it's a translation of the translation, because after all, the instrument is not the same, the understanding is, the hearing is not the same, the audacities don't appear to us so audacious, and the minor and the major and the moods and the so many things. And it's not just the tempo, it's not about speed or pulse, it's about eloquent expression, it's about understanding the point of an imitation of a dance or an aria. And who dances those Baroque dances today? Nobody. It was then something different when you rehearse on the harpsichord how to dance or how to sing in an aria or in a church music. So then you played on the harpsichord on your own the imitations or the stylizations of these genres. So in fact, a lot of the harpsichord music of Bach is evocative of other genres than its own, except when he writes a fugue, which is like the musicians genre. Though I guess you could dance on a fugue too, but it wasn't meant for that. And though there are characteristics, some sound like jigs, some sound like some kind of dance of a lighter style, but nevertheless, most of them sound like chorale or perhaps even technique statement for practicing like scales and ornaments. The thing which really makes it very difficult for us is to forget what we've heard musically having happened in the development of the styles in Western Europe, since Haydn into, let's say, Ravel and Bach. Um, of course, the music is universal. The message is universal. The amazing feeling about this music is universal. How can it not? But I think that we have to once for all decide that if they were alive today, they would love to play for piano, compose on the piano like they composed on the harpsichord. And so, whatever is characteristic for the expression of the harpsichord, accents could be delayed instead of playing loud. Equal playing of quick notes is meant to be uneven in order to express the different emotions of each affect. Every note has a specific note as well as a note around that is a decorative note or an expressive note like an appoggiatura from above and a acciaccatura from underneath, a suspension from before, tied over or replayed, restricken, even held notes, and at which point, and therefore, if you imitate the harpsichord uneven playing, which in fact is the expression of the like I speak with an expression in the phrase and voice to be eloquent for the mood I want to express. On the piano, inevitably it's more percussive, inevitably it's more even and equalized rather than uneven. And so if you imitate the harpsichord on the surface of things for the piano, you make a travesty of yourself. You give a false impression that you're understanding the Baroque music of the time period. No, it's in the intervals, it's in the leaps, it's in the breathing between the notes, especially when you have a leap up. You don't have really a legato. That is a very 19th century romantic expression. Do fa la si do fa si la sol. I really cannot sing anymore. I'm not going to try. So I'm just trying to say that we have a lot of the slurs that happen on the dropping notes, like the appoggiatura. So it doesn't mean staccato when you do a leap up. It just means rearticulate in the piano. So in the key and then above the key, so that you give a change of bow direction or a new breath for another series of notes on the expiration when the wind player plays or the singer sings the lyrics, obviously. And so I think that on the piano we can translate it pianistically. We can play long legatos, which are uncharacteristic for their bowings or their breathing or their tempi. We can play extremely slow and stretched, which gives it another dimension for slow movements of meditational amazement. And probably if they were alive today, they would have loved that. I cannot, it's kind of naive to do retrofitting. But I imagine that if you ask them, so what will be the music played in the 21st century, in the 18th, they might have thought the musicians of the 21st century, meaning the composers. But in fact, we play the music of the past in our present with our instruments. So why not play it the way it sounds good on the piano? And good is determined by us, not by them. And of course, we have the purist specialists who know very well the interpretation of the instruments, which in a way give us the information how to play the tempo because of their length of decay, acoustic and instrumental. and the lengths of sounds or the groupments of raisings in the legato according to how many a bow could take in a string instrument. And so you had these systems where if it's in three, you have two and one, tia ta tia ta ta, or ta tia ta, short long if it is not long short most of the time. And if you combine several long over a group of bars, the hemiola tia 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 ta. So you have a 3-2 in the 3-4. You have a 6-8 within the 3-4. Well, actually, you have 2-3-4 to make a 3-2. 1-2-3, 1-2-3, 1-2-3-1. And inside the 1-2-3-4-5-6, you have 1-2-3-4-5-6, 1-2-3. So you have a 6-8 in the 3-4 and 2-3-4 into a 3-2. In other words, you have ways to rearticulate, to express the design of a pattern. If it's sol fa sol re mi fa sol fa sol re mi fa sol fa sol re mi fa sol, I think you can inhabit very, very intelligently the music of the past today, even if you don't use it in the way the instruments originally would tell you how to do. By their length of sound, they tell you the tempo, the articulation, the decoration, the dissonance, consonance, rapport of resonance, the tension release, which is then released in another tension with the syncopation, the separation of the downbeat with the upbeat when there is no more downbeat. If you go a chain system of syncopations, da 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 dee da da. And I think to only reduce the Baroque music played on the piano from the harpsichord to ornaments is very reductive. Of course, the agreements, agrément as they call it in French, or embellishments. Agrément in French means to agree, like symphonos in Greek means to agree, symphonia. So agreements means, in fact, agrément is that we have agreed on the type of ornaments we all play. So that's why most of the Rameau pieces or Couperin pieces, even Bach pieces used to be published in their time or briefly after, of course, with a table of ornaments according to their notation, which was not unified all over the place, obviously, because people didn't travel so much, but they all gave their own information, also how to play them. So the codification sign like mordent, trill, and then how to play it according to starting from which note up or the same, or how to do the ending. And so you learn sort of like the each composer gives their notational and interpretational chart of these decorations, and the rest they trust on you, and therefore there was no interpretation in Baroque times. It was a reading, it was a performing, but there was no interpretation, there was no translation. It was understood because they played the music of their time, of their period, of course, but also of their geographic area. And so the tradition of how long is an appoggiatura, how long is it trill, does it trill have a termination always, sometimes, not always, does it always start on the upper note, even if you arrive melodically from the upper note, and then it's an appoggiatura that is repeating note? Does the trill get measured, or is it uneven, or therefore unmeasured? And all kinds of elements which are variable of adjustment that they expect and they respect in a way to have the creativity of the performer come in, because all of them were educated to be composers anyway while performers. There was no separation, and therefore the suggested indications were mostly guidelines, but for the good taste, either by experience, by observing your teachers play, either by attending performances of people of your teachers' group, you adjusted yourself to your own musical taste for your own music when you composed it, or when you played their own pieces, or if not interpreted them, you would what today would be customize them. Like we do customizations, that would be what there was the interpretation of the time. And the more creative in the decorations you were, and the more creative in the ornaments you were, the more appreciated you were. of course, within the good taste, le bon goût in French court, but who defined it? But the time period and the countries. So that's why we learn about the different school of musical thought and expression that varies, even if it's in the same time period of the 17th, 18th century into early 19th century. And we played today outside of the context of their hearing, outside of the context of their instruments, outside of the context of their dances, outside of the context of their sense for repeats or for restatements, because they have to be written perhaps more for notational symmetry on the score, but perhaps was not always performed. Sometimes they were, for instance, all the ABA form things like trios or that had of a minuet. When you return to the minuet first section, we assume today, which is a very 20th century musicological opinion, that we don't repeat the first, second half repeats of the A section. That wasn't the case in the past, to say. They played it, and sometimes they didn't, but it wasn't a rule. And I think that in a way the creativity gave room to its own rules, which were unwritten or rarely charted. And of course we have C.P. Bach Versuch and the essay of expressive keyboard playing of Couperin's L'art de toucher le clavecin, the art of touching the harpsichord, and saw the various touches. But all these were not catalogues of rules that are universal. It was more like survey of what is fashionable in their world, in fact. And we are so far away not only from their time period, but from their context of hearing. So a dissonance, a consonance, a tension and release, a cadence, a modal, minor, major. Of course, major are two equal tetrachords, built tone, tone, semitone. But in minor, you have tone, semitone, tone for the bottom tetrachord, and the top tetrachord could be major or can be minor according to the descending mode we call natural, without the leading tone. And so you have the cadenzas, or the cadences as I used to call them before the Italianate cadenza, which was in fact the punctuations with the perfect cadence, the deceptive cadence, the plagal cadence. They're more or less weak, more or less delaying, or more or less conclusive, exactly like punctuation in texts. And therefore their usage combined to the expression of the music itself suggests that if you would do or not a ritenuto. I personally find that we overstate the need of ritenuto at the end of a Bach piece, because very rarely, or sometimes he does really, but most of the time there is no emphatic coda indication with the ritenuto, as we like to finish on a downbeat. Bach very often finishes to complete the bar, and even if it's incomplete, having started on an upbeat, he was still finishing complete the bar, but no necessity for, let's say, extra ending with a downbeat conclusiveness, either because there are a series of suites of dances and he doesn't expect to slow down and finish each of them as a last piece because of their list of pieces, or he just leaves it to the good taste of the performer. I don't think there's a right or wrong for this. After all, it's part of the interpretation and is allowed to be considered. But if it is that we do it because very often we are used since the Baroque and not during the Baroque time to have an agogic organization of the phrase where we finish on the downbeat. That is conclusive. And finishing it on the upbeat or the end of the phrase, it's unconclusive. It feels weak. It feels unfulfilling in a way, unexpressing that this is the end, as if the composer didn't think about it, and we have to help him towards the audience, hyphenating between the reading of the score and the performance by giving this kind of more emphatic ending. Sometimes it works, and it actually works very well for some, but I think it should be on the spur of the moment. You shouldn't decide that you'll do none or every time ritenuto, but you can choose to do it if on the spur of the moment, the way it's introduced, because it's not just the tempo, it's the text context of the texts And the content and the texture itself, if you have a tirata scale, or if you have a suspension series, or you have a sequence that ends, if it's up or down in terms of the scale of the range, so many ways that it's a case by case feeling. And then if you do the appoggiatura, is it taram, param, taram? It comes from the persuasive eloquence of the arias with the singing and the lyrics, and therefore the accentuation of the words. That's why I think a lot of the ornaments are connected also to the language of the composers. Amore in Italian operas would be in the middle of the word, the accent. Liebe in German would be on the downbeat. In French, amour would be at the last beat. And so you have to start in the upbeat to finish in the downbeat, not the piece, but the word, in terms of its correct accentuation in the eloquent singing of it. And therefore the music adapts in its expression to the words and the structure of the words of the spoken language which is sung. Of course, you can use Italian, Latin, German, French according to your countries, but in the beginning they all sang more or less for the church music in Latin in the Western world of Europe. But then afterwards, in the original languages, German was used for the Lutheran cantatas of Bach, who wrote them weekly in German. And they sung in German, and they were taught in German. And so the phrasing in music was in German. And when he writes for harpsichord, he does think in German. Even if he writes Italian concerto or French suite in title at least, or English suite, or the Italianate aspect or the French aspect is not just the dotted rhythm of the French overture, which would be very cliche, even if sometimes it's only that. But most of the time, he's trying to show that he's worldly and he can write in different styles, when in fact it's mostly variations of his own music. Bach, it's a theme on his own variations. It's a sort of beautiful analogy with his fugues, which are all incredibly developed pieces out of a single cell. It's really cloning, parthenogenesis. No second theme. Sometimes you have second and third subjects in shorter values if the subject is in long value in the beginning. But generally speaking, Bach is a man of North Germany and an organist in northern Germany. So the polyphony of the organ had length of sound and the short were in the background. And on the harpsichord, the short sounds are in the foreground because the long sounds are in the background since they vanish quicker. And so on the piano, they're all in constant presence. So you could be percussive and very intense and sometimes confusing. What do I bring out? What do I voice out? What do I voice in? And what do I bring out constantly or differently or every time the same way? Or do I always bring the thematic material? Or do I sing the secondary voices? Do I present in a fugue, in a singing tempo, this kind of choral singing with repeated notes that are legato, like changing syllables on single note? I would like to tell you, and it becomes sol, 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 si, sol when you play it on the piano without the lyrics. And if it's legato or sung imitation, then you have to find how to play it repeat, but within the key and not from above the key, so you don't have the tonguing. And you have ta 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 da da ba ta ha ha da da. And I find that once you put in together all these aspects of the elocution, of the expression, of the genre, of the style, of the hearing of the time, of the understanding of the musical conclusion or modulation or usage of effects like suspensions and appoggiaturas and mordents. In other words, the spice and the expression, the mood and the mode. I mean, it's amazing because you have to become a translator of something from another time period, from another instrument, from another psyche of hearing music, the way you conceive what is tension and release, what is devil in music and what is not, and how the consonances of yesterday are even more consonant today, but the dissonances of yesterday become consonant today without the need to search a resolution. So in a way, I'm still convinced, and I will never probably lose that conviction, that the music of the past was their present, and the music of the past is our present. It's just that I think we could be equally convincing to play it on the piano pianistically, long phrases legato, super slow tempi, or super fast tempi, and very percussive instead of articulated with short phrases that are imitational of the violin or the voice. In other words, we could play a minuet with a dancing pattern, pum pi dum pum pa. If the three beats are long and short, half note quarter ti pum, or short long quarter half dum pum, or you just play da 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 da, which is stylistically wrong on the piano, but is the essence of the instrument. The piano is meant to be, and it's practiced for, to be equalizing uneven fingers. Whenever the harpsichord is an expression of musical emotions through the patterns that are written in the score of the composer's indication, is to play unevenly. Through the unevenness, you express the real notes of this thematic skeletal situation from the decorative notes that delay them or embellish them. And so you say things with delay instead of saying them loudly, because you don't play loud and soft on the harpsichord, but you play now or a little later the note. So you linger, you expect, you delay. You play with the delay resolutions of the tensions, the suspensions that don't play right away in their delay, in their resolution, but delay. So you can have a suspension eighth note, over a suspension on quarter half note, and so it's the combination of the resolutions that are delayed and they're not horizontal, vertically organized, but horizontally layered, not only for the melodic lines, but also for the pulses. All this gives an incredible sense of freedom. And I think on the piano you can homogenize, and on the harpsichord you can separate the different elements. On the piano you can play it in a way that you hear it with the emotional expression of the legato, especially for the leap of the intervals up. On the romantic era of Chopin, Schumann, Liszt, Mendelssohn, and still be, if not authentic, convincing, because it corresponds to the way you love the piece. Of course, you can be taught, you can understand, you can learn, you can and you will, when you're educated, grow into a certain aspect of the fact where your intuition should be always contradicted by the tradition, the bowing, the phrasing, the breathing, the articulation, the decoration. And then you say to yourself, okay, if it's that, then I don't want to play it because I like it, even if it's the wrong way on the piano compared to the harpsichord. And if I can bring in a lot of the affects of the Baroque performance on the harpsichord on the piano, there are certain things which I can't bring. I'll just leave them like they are. And I play them pianistically. And I think, honestly, that's fine. Because if you constantly, let's say, contradict your musical intuition as a pianist because you play a non-piano work, then at some point you finish by thinking, I don't want to play that piece, if it's what it takes. Or then I have to learn it in its original language. It's like saying, I'm not going to read Harry Potter translated in my language if I'm not British. And then I'll have to learn British English, and I'm going to read Harry Potter in his language. And I'll read War and Peace in Russian, and I will read The Red and the Black in French. Fine, then, of course, in order to taste all the subtleties of the language, the choices of words which have their own innuendos that the translation cannot carry or can could but doesn't, or then you have to read all the footnotes constantly. At some point it's no more fun to read with footnotes only, in order to keep some context for to give you the taste of the fruits that you're tasting. So it becomes a translation of meaning, not and by the time you translate the atmosphere, the mood, you lose the intensity of the action that you're reading if it's a novel like Harry Potter, for instance, just out of the blue, an example. So, of course, for poetry, it's impossible to translate because it's so entrenched in its own language, without which it's not a poetry. You can translate the meaning, but you have to know the language or learn the language in order to taste the choices of the words more than another synonymous word. And then it's not just for the rhyme, it's also, but not only. And so you enter in the fact that you realize that to play any composer's music, you have to know his or her stylistic, aesthetic, language, expression, and time period, as well as transgression for its time period, so that the audacity of it doesn't escape you, or as well as the capacity of transcending this tradition and saying, I'm going to play it my way, today's way, but knowingly, with education, not just intuition, nor with refrained intuition, when I feel like I'm just reciting something I don't believe in a way that I don't believe it said. And I need to be convincing, because I bring alive the music notes that are sort of dead on the paper, and they come alive. So if I play the grace note tight or on the beat, before the beat, or melodized, too much. Too much of all this. We need to remain very earnest and not naive, but very deeply convinced that what we translate are leaps, intervals, pitches, rhythms, patterns, modulations, expressions through all these craftsmanship of the Baroque, and then we translate it through the artistry that our instrument, acoustics, and capacity of playing with pedals even can bring to the length of sound, the clarity of the articulation. And we don't want to only worry about if it's allowed or not to play the ornament on the beat or before the beat, until which time period, because that is a lot of factual knowledge, but it doesn't really make an interpretation. I think an interpretation of the Baroque piece on the piano should be a conviction of the spur of the moment that has some elements left in the variable of adjustment of the moment. Either the acoustics or the instrument responds in a way on which you play, because you never play twice on the same piano or so in performances, and you adjust, and somehow the piece reveals itself differently just because you allow it to live and evolve, because you present it in different situations. Of course, if you limit all this with playing it only on your piano at home, you end up by having inevitably rules that are applied for everything through the touch and the exact amount of weight and articulation you put on each key. But when you try to play this on different instrument, it comes out differently, and therefore you have to make this, bring this adjustment on the spot. That is some kind of an adaptive intelligence. And then the audience that hears it came to hear it with an opinion or none, if they don't know it, or if they do, a certain way to hear it because of a performer or themselves whom they like, and then they discover it a different way through you. So either they reject, saying that's not supposed to be, too fast, too slow, don't like, it's too much this, it's too romantic, it's not enough Baroque, as if Baroque is not romantic, and without to define what, we just draw conclusions and we say, oh, but I like better this and this, or anyway the instrument. So you can always dismiss it by the instrument and say, anyway, there's no point. It's never going to be convincing if it's going to be like that. Or if it's on this instrument, it's not convincing because it's not like the other people who played, like Bach, or on the piano, it's like Gould or nobody. And so, of course, Gould has a touch in articulation and connection and direction of the line through detached touch in general, but not always. But that is so peculiar to him, and that functions convincingly through him. And if you want to be convinced, you can say it. If you don't want, you can also say, I don't like the way he articulates. But the fact is that he found his own cohesion in this translation of the 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 material and the idiom. And I find that there are multiple ways to be playing Bach on the piano, not only Gould's. If the piano remains pianistic, if the piano tries to imitate voices or strings or woodwinds or a symphonic orchestra or groupment of instruments of the Baroque, it's in the head, in the heart, and in the fingers of the performer. I think it's ultimately in the soul. Let knowledge not overcome intuition. Let intuition not ignore knowledge. Idealization of human experience on earth. The more you know, the least you dare. The more you dare, the least you know. It's not always in such order or such proportion, rather. It evolves with the pieces. And you can very well, oh my God, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, why did I play it that way? When you hear yourself from earlier recordings nowadays, you can even give yourself a lesson, which you do every time you hear yourself anyway recorded, let less in time, because then you realize that you have evolved in the understanding of the piece, discovered more period interpretations with the instruments of the time or the way they were played or supposed to have been played, and then you incorporate it in your playing more than you would have if you knew it earlier or because you didn't know it earlier. And it's all about earnestness, really, and really conviction. You play an answer, even if it's temporary and ephemeral, that vanishes at the end of the performance on the stage, but during it's constructed like an amazing structure that seems to be this amazing structure, and it ends up by being, in fact, a sandcastle on the beach. After the applause, the wave comes in and it's all to be rebuilt again and again and again. Since the music is so beautiful, it's never boring because it's always a renewed option to serve it better, mean it better, translate it better, say it better more than sing it. I wonder to such extent these things are really convincing. I myself doubt very often. Not as a teacher as much, because I try to give guidelines to the students to organize their own possible doubt, but I give them a lot of craftsmanship rules of knowledge, how to organize their thought process, their technique, and their understanding of the genre, the style, to express themselves eloquently with understanding, but not with an imitational system of mind per se. That's not the goal. The goal is not to please me as a teacher. The goal is to find a way to please themselves, feeling that they are getting in the sculpting of the texture closer to a truth that they provide in their playing, their touch, their expression, their crescendo, or their lack of, or their subito piano or forte, or their ornaments, and how many and where and on which beats. I find it so enriching to open the horizon lines and tell them to really dig inside deep their own musicianship. They have to take responsibility in what they do, despite what they're told. That they trust it or not, it's another question, but that they integrate some of it, it's their choice. And when, perhaps in years from now, not when they're my students at the lesson, we can try to say, how can I try right away, see if it can work? Because somehow it can be appealing to hear for the student in the example of the teacher, if it's not exaggerated to prove the point, which is in fact often my case, not to mention sometimes even very often improvise to prove how beautiful it is the way it is, and why or how it didn't go in the other options that the composer might have had to develop the thought. So when all these examples are played, either to be imitated, either to be considered, either to be amalgamated to their own present understanding of the piece as students playing it, it's only in a certain time frame passing these studying years when they teach it in turn or they perform it or record it, write an article about it, whichever way they deal with it, if they go back to it and it starts traveling with their own human life path, is a parallel path, the music path of the piece. And the piece tempo evolves and perception of it evolves, the touch perhaps evolves, the dynamic ranges evolve, the contradiction comes up and say, I didn't like the way my teacher told me, I prefer this way because it really means to me more. And I find that right. That's beautiful. I don't discourage that. I encourage it. Seems a little bit counterproductive to encourage something against my convictions, but I think that my convictions are only for this and that detail, but put together it has to be coherent according to the composer's opinion that I think was the one, but that can differ from the other person playing it, regardless if they're students or not of mine. And if a teacher says, oh, that's not supposed to be, that's wrong, I find that extremely unsubtle, let's put it this way. Well, sometimes you really want to say it as a teacher. Do this, do that, it's supposed to be. And then you realize that with some repertoires, it's difficult to be so, and it shouldn't be so reductive to it's right and the other ways are wrong. And it's not about philosophical tolerance about different points of view, because sometimes this is more rhetoric than truth in the reality. In the reality, we have passions and convictions and rejections of this and that. If it's of people, sometimes it's mostly also of ways of thinking, of concepts, and say, oh God, I hate this piece, or perhaps it means, oh God, I hate that way people play that piece. Then it becomes my way is better than the others, and then somebody else plays it for you differently than you, and you like it, thinking, I never thought of that way. But you say it to yourself silently inside yourself. It's not something you claim in the world because of self-esteem and all that. And I think when you teach and you say to a student, this is not supposed to be played like this, and I've heard that so often, I always find that while it's convincing and it's necessary for the student to receive a frame within which to develop their own interpretation, therefore they have to reject something in order to keep something, but to be convinced of why they keep this tempo and not another, the capacity, quality and quantity of integrating the decorations and the possible ornaments, all these have to be at some point a choice of the performer, therefore the student, not only as a reenacting the rules of the teacher, or at least set by the teacher, besides the preface of the score or the articles about how to play dance music of Bach, how to play ornaments in Bach, on the beat, before the beat, on the upper note or not. And all these elements can be taught and are to be read, and then they're to be implemented by the student, filtered, macerated in their own soul, in their own creativity, but also integrity. And they have to say, no, I don't like it this way because it's too much, not enough, whatever they want to call it, romantic, baroque, and it doesn't matter how you define the what is too much or how much. It's as long as you feel it. It's a sense. You're driven by some kind of inner sense to repeat until you know it. You sculpt something out of the material and you extract the piece through the articulation, shaping. It's almost like sculpting on the keyboard. Allegorically, the music itself, the design of a phrase, the melodic line, the rising note, the repeated note, the dropping note, the upbeat note or the downbeat note, and the syncopation and the hemiola and the articulations and the 2 by 2 or by 4 or by 2 and 1 t pum pum para tara tara pum pum. It's more seductive this way, it's more intellectual the other way, it's more thought provoking one way, and the other way is more smooth and more expected, and it should be flowing. And sometimes you feel like the music is so incredibly, every fugue of the well-tempered clavier starts with a different affect, surprise or upbeat or downbeat, rarely, but mostly an interval in the fugal subject that defines a lot of the things that will be happening in the fugue, if it's step motion or a big leap, if it's long or short, if it's chromatic, and how it's going to meet the different voices, the contra subject, the answer, and how they're going to organize themselves into intervals that will be selectively intense or painful or intensely jubilant. I believe very much that bringing a student to the point to which they can choose on their own, it's marvelous. Ultimately, they play music because it means to them, to work hard on expressing it because it means to them. And it might not mean to them the way it means to us teachers or me personally. And I might differ with the way they play because I might say, stylistically, even translated on the piano, this Baroque piece doesn't sound right like that. I don't like ritenuto at the end of Bach pieces because a lot of them combined after each other in a suite of movements or dances becomes redundant. So I choose not to. So it's an intellectual choice, but individually I would probably do some. But they're not always played as separate pieces. They're played not also as a group, but in general, especially Bach's music, it seems like the flow of a tap of water. You open the tap and the water flows, and when you close the tap, it goes on the pipes for the rest of the system, but it's still flowing. So I feel like often Bach pieces that don't have introductions or conclusions, and most of them don't, some do, it seems like he just starts the piece because you sort of jump on the let's say train in motion, and you jump out of it while it continues to move. So you just entered in the section of a piece and you leave it before the end of that section, but you've traveled a path with it, but it's still going on in some kind of perpetual motion of flow. Well, that's some of my opinions, at least. And if the students don't agree, I don't blame them. I try to convince them with my argumentation and my examples and my convictions and my credibility and my education and the traditions of the way I was taught about these things. But I don't make it into a dictatorship of the good taste that would be mine, dictatorship of the right way of behaving in this tempo or this dance, because a jig is this and sarabande is that. And okay, I can describe them, I can, and I have to give context for those by the choreography or the necessity of the genre, the style, and the mood. But once all that is said, then I give an example. The students play what they feel. And how much of what I said exemplified or explained, if it was convincing one way or the other, they might take some proportion of it in them, with them, for them, to express, to implement in what it means to them. It's beautiful to agree to disagree. Or also sometimes is touching when you see their agreement through their playing. Oh, they accepted this aspect of what I suggested last week. That's nice. I wouldn't lie. It's pleasing for the teacher on the short term too. Not everything is long term, that you never see the fruits of your labor, or you feel like the students are taught by me and the teachers in general by just having grains in this, and then the blossoming of all these fruits and vegetables or whatever, the it comes much later, because it takes a lifetime to be absorbed and to be their own, to become their own. But in short term, it's pleasing, I must say. I must confess, it's very pleasing. But it's not my aim. Sometimes it's better not to be pleasing and rather be implemented within a concept that they have different of mine about tempo and phrasing, but perhaps the articulation. It's already not bad. It's not about me counting how much they'll take, accept, agree, or implement of my opinions and ways. It's more about seeing if and how they find the integration of the elements within their own intuition and their own knowledge of the piece that they're constructing at the point where I'm restating it, they're discovering it. And that is beautiful transmission, two ways. I'm inspired by their freshness of approach, and I hope they're inspired by my freshness, but combined with 4 decades at least of companionship with the pieces and what they mean and how they are supposed to be meant.